Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. I never thought something so terrifying would happen to me, especially not in the peaceful suburb of Texas where I grew up. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, where the mornings smell like fresh cut grass and the evenings feel like warm, soft blankets. I always felt safe there. My name is Jenna, and this story starts when I was a high school senior, home alone for the weekend while my parents visited relatives in Houston. It wasn't a big deal. I'd had the house to myself plenty of times before, and everything always went smoothly. My parents trusted me enough to leave me alone for a couple of days without worrying about me getting into trouble. The house itself is nothing special, just your typical two-story brick house with a small front porch and a patchy lawn that Dad insisted I should help mow, but never actually did. But it was home. I never felt afraid of it. I mean, who would? It's in a neighborhood where everyone is friendly, where kids play in the street, and dogs bark at the squirrels. The sound of crickets chirping fills the air every evening. A safe place. That Friday evening, my parents left around 6 p.m. They'd be gone for the whole weekend, and I was perfectly fine with that. I didn't have any plans, and I was looking forward to having some quiet time. The house was mine, and I could do whatever I wanted without anyone around to tell me what to do. I spent the night in the living room, lying on the couch and scrolling through my phone, watching Netflix, and letting the hours slip by. I didn't think much of it when I started feeling tired. After all, I had stayed up late the night before, catching up on schoolwork. By the time it was around midnight, I decided to go to bed. Before I turned in, I checked the doors and windows like I always do when I'm home alone. I guess it's something I've grown up doing. My parents are big on safety, and it's just become second nature to double check everything before I call it a night. I remember walking around the house, turning the locks on all the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure. There was no way I was going to let something happen in my own home, especially with no one else around. After that, I climbed into bed. I didn't even bother with the lights. The glow from my phone screen was enough to light up the room just enough to see. I was exhausted, and within minutes, I felt my eyelids getting heavy. I pulled the covers around my shoulders, sinking into the soft warmth of my bed, letting the peaceful silence of the house lull me to sleep. But it didn't last long. It was hard to say when it started, but I was woken up by the faintest sound. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Just some background noise from the night outside, maybe a wind gust brushing against the oak tree in the front yard. The scratching sound came again. It wasn't loud at all, but it was rhythmic, soft, almost as if someone was dragging their nails gently across glass. I lay there for a moment, my eyes wide open now. My mind raced. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just the tree outside, swaying in the wind. The old oak has branches that reach out toward the windows, and when the wind picks up, it can make some strange sounds. I told myself it was nothing, just a tree doing its thing. I rolled over and pulled the covers tighter around me. But then it came again. This time, the sound was sharper, more deliberate. I had to admit it wasn't the wind anymore. This wasn't something natural. The scratching, scraping against the window, it sounded too purposeful, like someone was trying to get my attention. But who would be outside my window at this hour? No one. This was a quiet neighborhood. Everyone was either asleep or inside, right? I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept getting louder. It wasn't just scratching anymore. It was as if something or someone was methodically dragging something heavy across the glass. There was a faint metallic screech now, And that's when I realized it wasn't just a branch scraping the window. This was something else, something intentional, something wrong. My heart started racing. What is that? I lay frozen in place, my body stiff. I couldn't move. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was just a branch caught in the wind, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It was too calculated. I turned my head toward the window. The night outside was dark, but the streetlights cast a soft, dim glow onto the yard. The shadows were long and stretched across the lawn. My eyes scanned the yard, trying to spot anything that could explain the sound. And then I saw it. A figure. A gloved hand. It was barely visible at first, but there it was, stretching over the edge of the windowsill. Slowly, it wrapped around the window, trying to pry it open. The image hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The hand was gloved, dark, black, and heavy, like someone who didn't want to leave any fingerprints behind. The figure was trying to open my window, the very window I had locked just hours ago. The window that had never once let me down. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body was paralyzed with fear. Every thought that raced through my mind was drowned out by the sound of that window slowly sliding upward, the lock giving way with an agonizing, drawn-out creak. The man outside was strong, methodical. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't concerned about making noise. I felt my breath catch in my throat. There was someone outside my window. Someone who shouldn't be there. Someone who was breaking into my house. The next moments felt like hours. I watched, paralyzed, as the figure hoisted himself over the windowsill. I could barely make out his silhouette in the dim light, but I could see enough to know he wasn't just a casual trespasser. No, this person meant business. And that's when everything hit me all at once. I'm gonna die. I snapped into action. I didn't have time to think. I scrambled out of bed, grabbing the first thing I could find, a bedside lamp. Without thinking, I swung it at the intruder with every ounce of strength I had. The glass shattered against his arm with a sickening crack, and he let out a muffled grunt of pain. For a moment, I thought I'd actually hurt him. But it didn't stop him. He lunged, and I barely managed to dodge him. My heart pounded in my ears as I scrambled toward the door. My feet were bare against the cold floor, and I felt a sharp sting in my foot as I stepped on something, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. I reached the door, but my hands were shaking so badly that I couldn't get the deadbolt to turn. My fingers slipped off the metal, and it felt like I was fighting against a force I couldn't control. The lock wouldn't budge. I thought I was going to die right there, in that hallway, with my own door keeping me trapped inside. Finally, with a desperate, frantic twist, the deadbolt gave way. I ripped the door open and bolted outside, my heart racing. I didn't look back. I didn't care. All I knew was I had to run. I heard the sound of his boots hitting the hardwood behind me. They were getting closer. I didn't think. I just ran, bare feet pounding against the cold concrete of the porch, not even stopping to take a breath. I ran across the yard, barely seeing where I was going. All I could think of was getting out, getting away, getting to safety. My neighbor's porch light flicked on, then another one down the street, and a dog barked. My own breathing sounded so loud in my ears, I almost couldn't hear anything else. I reached my neighbor's door and hammered on it, my fists pounding against the wood. A moment later, the door flew open. I didn't say anything at first. I just collapsed into her arms, gasping for air, my body trembling uncontrollably. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. My neighbor, confused and half awake, pulled me inside and asked what happened. I managed to tell her, barely, that someone had broken into my house. The police arrived not long after, but they didn't find anything. The area was searched, no sign of the man. The only thing left behind were the broken pieces of the lamp scattered across the living room and long, thin scratches along the window where the man had worked to pry it open. The intruder was never caught. There were no leads, no evidence to tell us who he was or what he wanted. The police told me I was lucky, but I didn't feel lucky. I felt violated, like someone had been in my space, someone who didn't belong there, someone who had planned this. I never stayed home alone again. Not after that night. Not after knowing that someone could be out there watching, waiting. It changed me. That peaceful, quiet suburban life I once knew, it felt like a distant memory. It was as though I had seen the other side of things, things I wasn't supposed to see, things I couldn't unsee. And every time I hear the wind rustling the trees outside my window, I wonder if that sound is just the branches or if it's something more, something much darker. My name is Aaron, and I'm 26 years old. I'm not one to share too much about myself, and I'm definitely not one to be considered superstitious or jump at every little noise or oddity. But what I went through, what I experienced in that house, it's something that I still can't shake off. I had just moved to a small suburban town in Texas. I was trying to escape the noise of city life, the chaos of everything. I had recently gone through a rough breakup, and I needed a change of scenery, something simple, something quiet. So when I found this tiny rental house, I didn't hesitate. The rent was dirt cheap, the place seemed quaint enough, and it wasn't far from the bar I was working at. It was the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. The house itself wasn't much to look at. It was a small, two-bedroom, single-story home with cracked white paint on the exterior and a small porch that seemed like it had seen better days. The yard was overgrown with weeds and a few scraggly bushes that barely clung to life. But I didn't care. All I needed was a roof over my head and some peace. Mr. Collins, the landlord, seemed a little too eager to get me settled in. He was an older man, tall with salt and pepper hair and a tired face. He didn't say much, just handed me the keys and wished me well. He seemed like someone who just wanted to be left alone, and I respected that. At first, everything was fine. The first few days in the house were peaceful. I unpacked my things, started to get used to the sounds of the old wooden floors creaking beneath my feet, and adjusted to the strange, musty smell that lingered in the corners of the rooms. The kitchen was small but functional, and the bathroom, though tiny, was enough for one person. The bedroom had a small window that overlooked the backyard, which was mostly just a patch of grass and a fence that separated the property from the empty field behind it. I settled into a quiet routine. Work was busy, and I didn't have much time to focus on anything else. My shifts at the bar kept me occupied, and I'd come home late at night, tired and ready to sleep. It was on the 7th night that I first noticed something wasn't quite right. I was standing at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes from dinner when I glanced out the window. It was almost midnight, and the kitchen light flickered faintly, casting shadows against the walls. I had always thought the yard looked empty, but tonight something caught my eye. Just beyond the reach of the porch light, a dark figure stood by the back fence. It was hard to make out details, but the shape was unmistakable. A person, standing still, unmoving, almost blending into the shadows. I froze. I'm not sure what made me stop. Maybe it was the strange stillness of the figure, the way it didn't seem to shift even slightly as I watched. I couldn't make sense of it. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just some neighbor, a drunk person stumbling around, or someone walking their dog. But there was something about the way that person stood there, unmoving, that felt wrong. My heart began to race in my chest, and I found myself staring at the figure, feeling a cold knot twist in my stomach. I wanted to call out, but I didn't. I didn't know why. I just stared, frozen. The figure didn't seem to notice me, or if it did, it didn't react in any way. It just stood there. My eyes flicked back and forth, making sure I wasn't seeing things. I pulled the blinds down as quietly as I could, feeling the weight of my breath in the silence that followed. My hands trembled as I set the dish in the sink, but I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Probably some kid messing around, or maybe a person lost in the dark. That night, I tried to sleep, but I kept hearing things. The creak of the floorboards, the whistle of wind through the trees. I kept imagining that the figure was still out there, standing by the fence, watching. The next night, it happened again. I was doing dishes once more, barely able to keep my eyes off the window. I told myself I wouldn't look, but then I did. And there it was, just like the night before. The same figure, standing motionless by the fence. This time, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been there longer than I'd realized, as if it had been watching me for hours before I even noticed. My heart dropped into my stomach. I pulled the blinds down faster than I ever had before, as though that would somehow make everything disappear. I could hear my pulse in my ears, my chest tight with fear. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police, but then I thought, what would I tell them? Hey, there's someone standing outside my window every night, but they haven't done anything, and I don't even know who they are? That didn't seem like enough to justify a call. So I kept it to myself, thinking maybe I was just being paranoid. But then the figure came back the next night, and the next. Always standing there, watching. The exact same spot, never moving. The more I thought about it, the more it started to gnaw at me. The timing was always the same, too, around midnight after I'd come home from my shift. And the figure wasn't just standing still anymore. Some nights it would be closer, just at the edge of the porch steps, right outside the window. There was no way it could have gotten that close without me hearing something, but there was nothing. No footsteps, no sounds. Just a person standing there, watching. At that point, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to do something. I called the police. When they arrived, they seemed skeptical. I mean, I couldn't blame them. I was just a single woman living alone, probably getting a little too worked up about nothing. But they went through the motions. They walked around the yard, shining flashlights at the bushes and the trees, inspecting every inch of the fence. They even knocked on the neighbors' doors to see if anyone had seen anything unusual. But when they came back to me, they said the same thing every officer always says, probably a prank. Call us if anything else happens. I was left standing there, alone, with nothing but my own thoughts to keep me company. That night, I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept racing. Was it a prank? Was someone just messing with me? It didn't feel like a prank. The figure wasn't moving like someone who was just fooling around. It was too deliberate, too still, patient. The next few nights were worse. Some nights, the figure was right up against the porch steps. I could see the outline of a person standing there just beyond the light. And other nights, I heard tapping. At first, it was faint, just a soft tapping on the window. Tap, tap, tap. It would come and go like someone testing the glass with their fingers. Then it started getting louder. I'd be lying in bed trying to ignore it, but it was impossible. Tap, 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 always on the bedroom window. Every night it got closer, until I felt like the tapping was right next to me, like someone was standing right outside my room, waiting. One night I came home late. It had been a long shift, and I was exhausted. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. My headlights barely illuminated the porch, and the street was dead quiet. I walked up the steps, ready to let myself inside, but something stopped me. The front door. It was slightly ajar. Just a crack. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't remember leaving it like that. I was sure I had locked it. I always locked it. My breath caught in my throat as I fumbled for my phone and dialed the police. My hands were shaking as I spoke to the dispatcher. I told them I thought someone had broken in. They arrived quickly, checking the house from top to bottom. The door was intact. Nothing was missing. Nothing was out of place, but I could feel it. I could feel something had changed. Something wasn't right. The house felt colder somehow, as if something had passed through it, lingering in the air. I didn't feel safe anymore. The next day, I changed the locks. It didn't make me feel better, though. It didn't stop the watching. Every night, the figure was there. Desperate for answers, I finally confronted Mr. Collins, the landlord. I asked him if there was anything strange about the house, if there had been anything unusual with the previous tenants. He hesitated for a long moment, his face growing pale. Then he told me the truth. The last tenant had left suddenly, just packed up and disappeared. She'd told Mr. Collins that there was someone outside every night watching her. She didn't feel safe. That's why she left. And he said he'd never really been able to figure out what had happened to her. That was enough for me. The next day, I packed up and left. I didn't look back. I didn't care about the lease. I didn't care about anything. I was done. But even now I wonder, was it a person or something else, something darker, something that just watches and waits in the shadows? I don't know, and I don't think I ever will. It's just past midnight, and I'm driving home from my shift at the diner in this small Texas town. You know the kind of place. Quiet, rural, where nothing really happens unless it's bad news. Everyone knows everyone, but in that weird, uncomfortable way, like they know things about you they shouldn't. The locals here don't really talk to you unless they've got something to say, which in my experience isn't much. I've been working the late shift for the past few weeks to save up for rent, and let me tell you, the days seem to stretch on forever. Hank, my boss, is nice enough, but mostly doesn't notice me until I'm clocking out, which, honestly, is a relief. I don't need the small talk, especially when I'm exhausted after spending hours on my feet. It's not that the job is hard, it's just the loneliness that gets to me. The loneliness and the weird silence that falls over the diner once the last customer leaves. I can feel it now as I'm leaving the diner. The roads are mostly empty, dark, and lined with trees that seem to go on forever. The only light comes from the occasional gas station and the rare passing car. I'm driving my old sedan, the kind of car that's seen better days but still gets me where I need to go. The gaslight's been flashing for a while, and I know I'm cutting it close. But I'm too tired to care. The thought of pulling over to get gas isn't exactly appealing, but it's either that or risk running out on the highway in the middle of nowhere. I spot a 24-hour gas station a few miles up the road, its neon lights cutting through the night like a beacon. The place is small, rundown, and doesn't have much of anything other than a gas pump and a convenience store. I pull in, and there's only one truck in the lot, parked by the entrance. The station's nearly empty, except for the cashier inside, who's sitting behind the counter with his head down, probably watching something on his phone. He doesn't even look up as I get out of my car, which is fine by me. I don't need any small talk at this hour. The cold air bites at my skin as I pump the gas, and the familiar smell of gasoline fills the air. I'm almost done when I notice the truck. It's an older model, rusted and beat up. It doesn't seem like the kind of truck that should be parked here, so I look around, trying to get a better look at the driver, but there's no one in sight. I'm not exactly nervous, but my mind keeps wandering. Maybe I'm just paranoid from being so tired, but I can't shake the feeling that something's off. I finish pumping the gas, head inside, and grab a coffee. The cashier barely looks up as I pay for it, just mumbling something about how the night's been quiet. Quiet? Yeah, I think to myself. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I try to brush off the feeling, tell myself I'm just tired and maybe a little jumpy. It's silly, right? I'm just in a small town, late at night. Nothing's gonna happen. Still, the unease sticks with me like a bad taste in my mouth. As I make my way back to my car, I take one last glance around the parking lot. There's still no one else around, just me and the truck. I shake my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I'm being ridiculous. It's late, I'm tired, and I just want to get home. I slide into my car, start the engine, and pull out of the lot, back onto the highway. The road is empty, the only light coming from my headlights and the occasional flicker of a distant street lamp. It's peaceful in a way, the kind of peace that only comes from being in the middle of nowhere. I try to relax, but the strange feeling from earlier doesn't leave me. I glance at the rearview mirror, expecting to see nothing but the dark, empty backseat. But I don't know why. Something makes me look again. I don't even know what I'm looking for, but it's like my gut is telling me to check. My eyes sweep over the mirror, and then I stop. There's nothing there, nothing out of the ordinary. Still, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I adjust the mirror and keep driving. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. It's probably nothing. The road stretches on, the hum of my car the only sound in the quiet night. But then, as I turn onto a longer stretch of rural highway, I see it. Headlights. At first, they're just a small dot of light in the distance, and I think maybe it's another car. But as I keep driving, I notice that they're getting closer. Too close. Too fast. The headlights are bright, almost blinding in the mirror, and before I know it, the car is right behind me, practically on my bumper. I press down on the gas, trying to put some distance between us. But the car stays right there. The lights never pull back, never fade. It's like they're glued to me. My heart rate picks up as I check the rearview mirror again. The car behind me is close, so close that I can't see anything but headlights. My palms sweat as I grip the wheel tighter. The hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Something about this feels wrong. I don't know what it is, but I can't shake the feeling that whoever's behind me is doing this on purpose. I speed up, trying to lose them. But no matter how fast I go, the car stays right there, close enough that I can see the light flickering across the rearview mirror. There's nowhere to turn, no way to get off this highway, just miles of empty, dark road stretching out in front of me. And then it happens. I see it, in the dim glow of the passing streetlights. Something moves in the backseat. I freeze. It's like time slows down. My heart stops for a second. I swear, I saw something. A shadow, a figure. My stomach lurches, and I jerk my eyes back to the rearview mirror. There's nothing there. But I know what I saw. I saw something. A rustling noise. It's soft, barely audible, but it's enough to send a jolt of panic through me, like fabric brushing against fabric. I grip the steering wheel harder, my knuckles turning white as I look back at the road, trying to keep my eyes focused. But all I can think about is that noise, that movement, that something or someone was in my back seat. I can't think straight. My pulse is racing, and I can barely catch my breath. I look back at the rearview mirror, and that's when I see it again. A movement, something shifting in the dark. It's not just a shadow this time. I swear I see a figure, a man, a person sitting right behind me, their face obscured by the dim light. I don't know what to do. Instinct kicks in. I slam my foot on the gas pedal, swerving the car to the side, trying to get away from whatever's back there. The tires screech on the gravel as I lose control of the car, spinning out of control. My heart races as the car skids off the road, the world tilting as I struggle to keep it together. The car finally comes to a stop, but I can't move. I can't breathe. I throw open the door and leap out of the car, not even thinking. My legs feel like they're made of jelly as I stumble into the gravel. I don't look back. I don't care. I just run. I don't even know where I'm going. I just need to get away. I run until I find a large tree and duck behind it, breathing hard. My heart is pounding in my chest. My head is spinning. I pull out my phone with shaking hands and dial 911. I try to whisper my location, but the words are stuck in my throat. I hear the operator on the other end, but I can't focus. All I can do is wait. I watch through the branches of the tree, trying to steady my breath. My eyes scan the road, heart hammering. I keep expecting him to show up, to come for me. But nothing happens. The road is empty. There's no sign of the car, no sign of the man. Then the headlights appear. It's the car. I freeze behind the tree, holding my breath. The car pulls up to my abandoned vehicle and I watch as it stops, the headlights casting long shadows over the pavement. The driver doesn't get out. Instead, they just honk the horn 3 short bursts. My breath catches in my throat. Then I see him, the man. He gets out of my car, his movements slow and deliberate. He's tall, wearing a dark jacket that blends into the night. I can't see his face, but I don't need to. The moment I see him, everything inside me tells me to stay hidden. I can see him through the cracks in the tree. He had been there the whole time, hidden in the back seat, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. He gets back in the car with the driver, and I see them exchange a few quick words. It's all too fast for me to make out. Then they drive off, disappearing into the darkness. I can barely breathe. The police arrive soon after. I'm shaking as I tell them everything, but I don't know how to explain it. How do you explain something like this? How do you explain that you almost took a stranger home with you without even realizing it? They search the car. It's only then that they find the knife, the rope, the things he left behind. I don't even want to think about it. The worst part? The security footage. The gas station's cameras catch everything. They show the man slipping to my car while I'm inside, completely unaware. He'd been there, hidden in the back seat, waiting for the perfect time. The police never found him. No leads, no clues. The footage wasn't enough to track him down. And sometimes, even now, when I'm behind the wheel late at night, I can't shake the feeling. That feeling that someone is still there, just behind me, watching. I've always been someone who cherishes peace and quiet. The hustle and bustle of city life, the constant noise of traffic and chatter had worn me down over the years. The constant movement, the ever-present hum of the world around me. It had all become too much. After years of living in the fast-paced, sleepless city, I knew it was time for a change. I longed for a slower, quieter existence, a life where I could breathe, a place where the noise of the world could be left behind. When an opportunity for a job opened up in a small town in Texas, I didn't hesitate. It seemed like the perfect chance for a fresh start, a break from the clamor of my old life. I could already imagine it, living in a quiet apartment in a small, peaceful town, surrounded by nothing but the sounds of nature and the occasional friendly conversation with a neighbor. I found a modest, one-bedroom apartment in a small, aging complex on the outskirts of town. It wasn't anything special, a building that had seen better days, the beige walls weathered by years of wear, the floors creaking underfoot as if the building itself had a life of its own. But to me, it was perfect. A little rough around the edges, sure, but it was quiet, and that was all I needed. The building was old, built in the days when apartments were meant to last a lifetime, and the hallways were narrow, lit by dim lights that flickered every now and then. The windows were single-paned, letting in sunlight, but also the distant sounds of the outside world. There weren't many tenants, just a handful of people, each keeping to themselves. The quietness of the building was comforting to me. It was what I had been searching for. I wasn't looking for community or friendship. I just wanted a place to call my own, a refuge from the world. But then there was Carter. Carter was the first person in the building who introduced himself. He seemed like a nice enough guy, someone who made an effort to be friendly. He was in his early 30s, tall with dark hair that he kept styled neatly, and his clothes, button-down shirts and pressed pants, always made him seem put together, as though he had his life perfectly under control. The first time I saw him in the hallway, we exchanged a brief greeting. A simple smile had a polite nod as he passed by. It was nothing extraordinary, but it was enough to break the silence and make me feel like I wasn't entirely alone in this new place. Over the next couple of days, I crossed paths with him a few more times. Every time we met, he'd give me a warm smile and ask how I was doing. His voice had a calm, friendly tone, and there was a certain sincerity behind his words that made him seem genuinely interested in how my day was going. At first, I thought it was just friendly small talk, nothing more than a pleasantry. But it was nice, having someone acknowledge my presence, even if it was just a passing exchange. Carter didn't seem like the type to make small talk with everyone, though. He seemed to know all the other tenants in the building by name. I found it strange at first, but I figured maybe he just had a good memory. He always seemed to have the right words for everyone, offering a friendly word here, a joke there, making the building feel like more of a community than I had expected. It wasn't that we were becoming best friends or anything, but Carter was always there, friendly and approachable, making the place feel a little more like home. But looking back now, I realize I missed something. Small signs that should have alerted me, things I brushed off as coincidence or simple friendliness. I couldn't have known then, but the pieces were slowly coming together in a way I couldn't understand. One night, things took a sudden and terrifying turn. It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting on my couch, watching a random movie on Netflix. The soft glow of the screen illuminated my small, cozy living room, and the silence of the apartment surrounded me like a blanket. It was the kind of quiet where you could hear every little sound, the creak of the floorboards, the faint rustle of leaves outside, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. But tonight, the quiet felt different, somehow oppressive. It was around 11 p.m. when I heard the knock. It wasn't a loud, demanding knock, but soft, almost hesitant. Polite, but urgent, as if the person on the other side of the door was trying not to disturb me, but at the same time needed something. At first, I thought it might be a neighbor, perhaps someone asking to borrow a cup of sugar or salt. But something about the timing and the quietness of the knock made me feel uneasy. I walked to the door, peeking through the peephole. What I saw made my stomach drop. Carter was standing there, but he didn't look like his usual self. Gone was the easy smile, the warm demeanor. His face was flushed, his eyes wide with panic, darting around like he was searching for something or someone. His hands were trembling as he raised them to knock again, his knuckles pale from the force of his grip. My heart raced in my chest, a sense of dread creeping over me. Something wasn't right. I opened the door just a crack, enough to speak to him, but not enough to let him in. "Hey Carter, everything okay?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to sound calm. I wasn't sure why, but the unease I felt in my gut was growing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. His eyes met mine, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Rachel," he said, his voice trembling, "I need your help. My sink, it's overflowing, and I can't get the water to turn off. It's about to flood my entire place, and I don't know what to do. Please, you have to help me." I stood there for a moment, my mind foggy with sleep and confusion. I wasn't exactly in the mood to help anyone, especially not at this hour. But the panic in his voice, the desperation, was hard to ignore. "Have you called a plumber?" I asked, half asking, half trying to buy myself some time. "Or the building manager?" "I did, but they won't be here for an hour," he said, his voice shaking now, a note of urgency in every word. "Please, just come help me for a second. You're the only one who can." I hesitated. It didn't make much sense, but I didn't want to seem cold or unfriendly. So, against my better judgment, I opened the door. That's when everything changed. The second the door opened, Carter shoved it wide, slamming it behind him with startling force. Before I could react, he grabbed my wrist, pulling me toward him with an unnatural strength. His fingers dug into my skin, and my heart stopped. "What the hell?" I gasped, trying to pull away, but his grip was like iron. My mind screamed for me to get away, but my body froze. "Shut up," he hissed, his voice low and cold, sending chills down my spine. And then I felt it, a sharp, cold pressure against my side. Something metallic, something that didn't belong. I looked down, my blood running cold as I saw the gleam of a large kitchen knife pressed against my skin. My breath caught in my throat, panic rising in my chest. I opened my mouth to scream, but he covered it with his hand, forcing me back against the wall. The blade pressed harder against my side, and I could barely breathe. "Don't make a sound," he whispered again, his breath foul against my ear. I was paralyzed. My body screamed for me to run, to fight, but I knew I couldn't overpower him. I was alone, and he was bigger, stronger, and there was no way I could win. My thoughts raced, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to come up with a plan, a way out. But then, my body reacted on its own. In a desperate burst of instinct, I twisted my wrist, scraping my nails across his skin. For a split second, he loosened his grip, just enough for me to break free. Without thinking, I kicked him as hard as I could, aiming for his knee. He stumbled back with a grunt, and I bolted. I didn't think, I just ran, not even caring where I was going. I heard him cursing behind me, but I didn't stop to look. I reached my bedroom door, slammed it shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so violently that it took what felt like forever to grab my phone. I dialed 911, whispering into the phone, pleading for help. I was barely coherent, my mind still reeling from what had just happened. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, hearing him pounding on the door from the other side. I thought for sure he'd break it down. My heart was pounding in my chest, each thump seeming to echo in my skull. When the police finally arrived, it was like waking from a nightmare. They were quick to take charge, checking the building, knocking on doors, calling out for anyone who had seen anything. But when they searched Carter's apartment, his so-called apartment across the hall, they found nothing. The door was locked, and the place was empty. Carter was gone. I could barely breathe as they questioned me, asked if I knew where he had gone or who he was. But the real horror came when they checked the records. The man who had been living across from me, the one I thought was Carter, the friendly neighbor I'd chatted with for weeks, wasn't even a tenant. The real Carter had moved out weeks ago. The man who had been living there, pretending to be someone else, had slipped into the vacant apartment unnoticed, changed his name, and started making himself part of the building's fabric. He'd been living there, watching me, waiting for the perfect moment. The police found signs of forced entry in the apartment, and it was clear he'd been hiding in plain sight all along. But they never found him. I couldn't stay there any longer. I moved out the next day, taking what little I had left and leaving behind the building that had once felt like a safe place. The thought that someone like him had been living just across the hall from me, watching me, made my skin crawl. The worst part, the police never found him. They never even knew who he really was. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.